how well we bond with people in our lives, especially the ones that are closest to us, has the most significant impact on how well we regulate our stress. So if you want to know what's true for you, your body knows. And the way it knows is that Hi, I'm Michael Westgate. Thank you for joining me. I've helped people with chronic pain for over 2 decades. I aim to help you say goodbye to pain and hello to a fully lived life. Welcome, everyone. Glad to have you all here. I've studied attachment theory a little bit in the past, but I revisited it recently and I realized that it's an incredibly helpful tool for understanding how you are wired, and especially in relationship to your closest relationship. And the reason that's a significant thing for chronic pain, for example, is because how well we bond with people in our lives, especially the ones that are closest to us, has the most significant impact on how well we regulate our stress. So it's not a minor thing, right? This is a big deal. And especially for this other reason, which is that I've always been very interested in understanding how to orient oneself towards the most useful action to improve your condition, right? So, and how do you know that? Well, it's coming to light to me that there's a number of things that help point to those specific orientations that are not optimal in yourself and others. And of course, your real chance is to work on yourself, because changing other people is not really that easy to do. And, you can't really do that. I mean, they have to be willing to do it. What I've come to understand more profoundly as time goes by is that a connection to your body sensations, and therefore an awareness of them, is one of the main keys to being able to navigate your stress, to navigate yourself, because it's the most honest part of you. So if you want to know what's true for you, your body knows. And the way it knows is that it speaks to embodied sensations. And the body sensations are what translate into the chart that I show you guys all the time. From that chart, when you say, if your body sensation indicate that you're in freeze in response to, say, someone asking you to express your emotions about how you feel about something, and this is someone that you should be able to trust, that might be a sign that you have to work on something. Because if you're in a technically safe environment and you're going into a defensive strategy that's too extreme, that's going to get in the way of you having good bonds with others, responding to the world in a way that makes your life better. That's just one example. On the other hand, if you go into a very friendly mode when someone dangerous and unhealthy is around you, that also is not good. So these are the things that when you connect with your body, you can then more easily track, also alter eventually, and that response system can be altered. But you can't alter it until you know what it is and when it happens. You've got to have some more conscious awareness mixed with that sort of the voice of the body to be able to navigate yourself appropriately through life in a way that would, kind of increase your well-being and thriving, and also benefit other people around you. I wanted to explain a little bit of the science about what we're going to work with today and what's going to inform our writing exercises. So I want everyone to have something to write with. If you don't have it already, please scramble off and get it, because we will have a number of writing exercises that we're going to do in regards to what I'm going to present. So the theme of this session is how attachment styles and their challenges relate to how we can regulate our nervous system or not. What I'm talking about in this regard is the perspective of polyvagal theory and theories like it. So it's a different perspective than previously in many ways, but the attachment style theory has been around for quite a while. I think it's a really great lens. And so what it means, attachment style, is how our autonomic nervous system, which is that primal guardian I talk about, how it responds to your environment when you grow up. And an environment, I mean specifically your caretakers, right? And it's how does it adapt to the interactions of the caretakers with you, and how does that kind of equal your kind of style of relating long term? What happens is that if your caretakers are very attentive and responsive, the result is what's called a secure attachment style. And that's, in polyvagal terms, that means that your circuits of safety and trust and ease are opened up and enforced and kind of reinforced. And that becomes your default typically, is that you feel pretty secure in life, feel secure with other people. And so it's not really hard for you to trust and to let go and to make good friendships and good relationships. However, when caretaking isn't consistent, there's neglect or abuse, the nervous system will adapt to protect itself. And it does that by going into patterns of either hyperarousal, which is fight flight, or shutdown, like the low energy states, which, or it can go between the two, which most people, it goes between the two, but most people have a dominant. And that, of course, is going to kind of affect very largely how you're able to handle your stress or not. Now, the other thing is I kind of lightly touched on the big five personality model, and that's another psychological theory where it talks about how we are all born with preset, more or less preset temperaments that help us solve certain problems in the world. But there's always a downside to every temperament, meaning there's always going to be sort of a weakness or a negative aspect of each temperament, as well as a positive one. And one of the things that I explained is that if you have this sort of spectrum of traits, high in neuroticism, that sounds awful, but what it actually means is that you're very sensitive to negative emotion. So, in other words, in any given situation, you will more likely feel afraid or upset or cautious in regards to any given stimulus or interaction with someone than average person. That would be very typical in caretakers. So people that are really good at mothering, women that are good at mothering, men that are good at nurturing, people that end up in caring professions like nursing, a doctor, if they're a good one, that they're going to be high in this because they're going to be very sensitive to what's not right in the environment and not right with other people. They also tend to be high in agreeableness, which is another trait, kind of a spectrum of traits. And if you're high in agreeableness, that you're always adjusting to others for their benefits. Of course, it has a downside is that you often don't take care of yourself. And then the other aspect is openness. So that's openness to ideas and to different ways of being. And people that have all three of these are more likely to be traumatized because if you're high neuroticism, you're overwhelmed more easily. If you're too agreeable, you tend not to stand up for yourself and you're more of a target for narcissists and other people that aren't great people. And if you're highly open, sometimes you will be open to ideas you kind of shouldn't be because you're a little too open and too accepting. So that's something to just be aware of. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because if you had a different dynamic in your base personality, you might not actually have the same reaction at all to parenting, even if it isn't ideal, because you're tougher in a sense. And it also, these spectrums of ways of being can also influence whether you respond in terms of the attachment styles, which direction you go. And we're going to go into that right now. So I want to explain that. Because this is like, let's say if two siblings grow up in the same environment, why do they have different attachment styles when they were in the same home? Well, it has a lot to do with their base personality. Now, let's start with and I want you guys to pay attention to this next section because I'm going to ask you questions about it later to write down. I mean, I want you, there's going to be a writing exercise where we would deal with it later on. So you want to be able to identify which attachment style you are as I describe it. So the most ideal one is called secure attachment. And this is when your caretakers are consistently responsive and nurturing and available, and you feel safe and supported in your life. And what that does is it activates the higher brain states of the nervous system, which is called the ventral vagal system. And it fosters calmness, safety, and social connection. And what it also does, it allows you to appropriately access the different energy states in the body so that you're more effective in life. So when necessary, you'll go into fight, flight, even defensive strategies, but you don't get stuck there. It's all, in other words, if someone's in your face and they're going to hurt you and you either run away or, attack them back and defend yourself, that's not dysregulation. That's actually appropriate response, or can be. And the same thing is if you're depressed because, one of your loving, very much loved relatives died, that's actually really healthy. That is not dysfunctional. And the other thing that's great about people in this category is that they're really good at bringing other people out of places of stuckness. They're so grounded and so okay that someone else might be depressed or angry or kind of spazzing out in some way, and they're soothing because they're not affected by that. They're not threatened by it, and they might come to you and say, just put their hand on your shoulder and speak to you in a way where you're like, oh, wow, okay, I feel better just because you're here. They definitely recover very quickly from conflict and emotional challenges. They tend to move through challenges very evenly and without a lot of drama. And they're very present and grounded with everybody. Now we're getting into the ones that aren't so ideal. So the next one is called avoidant attachment. And this style of connection, or I should say, style of bonding or not. It's when caretakers are dismissive or neglectful, unresponsive, or highly critical is often another thing that triggers this. So let's say that your parent was always telling you you're wrong, never let you speak up for yourself, and just kind of bullied you all the time. This would be likely that you would go into the attachment style, but not always. You might go into another one. And here's the key challenge for people in this place. They suppress their emotions and their physiological responses, being their body responses, they're just ignored. And they do that so they can be independent and avoid being vulnerable. And the impact on their nervous system is they tend to be in chronic fight, flight, or shutdown as a way of avoiding being vulnerable and emotionally connected. And so the tendency of this style is that they depend only on themselves and trust only themselves. So when they get stressed out, they go into their fortress, they shut the door, and they say, okay, at least I have myself to be with, and I can trust me, but I can't trust anyone else. Now, this has a lot of negative effects because when people shut down, this is seen as stonewalling and withdrawal. That means that their social bonding is very, very much compromised. And it means that they can't co-regulate because they're shut down and they're not available. They see people needing things from them as a threat. Therefore, they will feel nervous and agitated when people are, quote, too needy and wanting more from them than they want to give. So behavioral signs, emotional numbing or shutting down during conflict or intimacy. A lot of difficulty recognizing or expressing emotions. So it's hard enough even to name them at all, let alone express them. And I would say especially when they're stressed out. And so they're over-reliant on being independent as a way of feeling safe. The patterns of tension in their body can vary, but a lot of times it's in the shoulders, jaw, chest, and an armor, kind of like armor against the world. And they also have a really hard time breathing deeply, typically. Now, the next style is called anxious or insecure attachment. So this one is really when the perception of the person is that they could not count on anyone to meet their needs reliably. And therefore, they feel very uncertain and insecure about getting their needs met. And what that does is it makes their orientation to be okay dependent on everyone else around them being okay. So they become hypervigilant and fearful, and they're always being afraid of being rejected or abandoned. This means they're always very anxious, and they have this sort of buzzy, sort of nervous energy all the time. And they're always trying to get everyone to be okay around them, to a point of annoyance to everyone else, typically. And they don't have self-soothing skills, and they're not self-reliant. They have a really hard time being alone. Most likely, if you're anxious attachment style, you will not do well without a partner, and you're going to tend to jump from one partner to another without much of a break because you can't handle being with yourself since you don't trust yourself. And again, it's a constant state of alertness. You're always scanning for signs of things being wrong. You're always trying to pounce on things and solve problems. So these people are really good problem solvers, but they tend to try to solve problems for everyone else rather than themselves. And then when they think everyone else is okay, then they would have a little time for themselves, maybe. They have a really hard time calming down after conflict or perceived rejection. And again, over-reliance on external resources and reassurance to feel safe and grounded. And they also tend to be very clingy, and when they don't get that attention, they tend to have outbursts of emotion and frustration. So the patterns in the body tend to be tightness in the chest and throat and stomach due to worry. Fidgetiness and restlessness is also very common. Now, the last one is called disorganized attachment. This one is where the person is going to go back and forth between the two styles we just mentioned. Now, all of these can be due to traumatic experiences, but this one especially would be someone that was, probably really, really, really neglected or abused, maybe even a higher level than typical. So these people are extremely dysregulated, and they're basically oscillating, bouncing back from being kind of really nervous and hyper and maybe even angry to being all shut down and depressed and unavailable, they're hard to be around because you don't know what you're going to get next, and they don't either. So, they're just being kind of run by whatever is happening around them. So, what's the point of all this? Well, the point of all this is that if you know which style you are, you know what you have to work on in terms of using the exercises and practices that I teach to help you break through those barriers. And let me explain that real quick. And I'll talk about myself right now because I have the anxious attachment style. So, what I've been working on myself is that when I feel that neediness kick in, right? This is what happens to me is I don't feel like I'm getting enough attention or enough care or whatever it is. Or even if I'm by myself and like, let's say I'm kind of try to go to sleep, I get nervous because I don't feel safe without someone else around. So what do I do? Well, the things that we just covered are options. I'm not saying that's the right thing for sure for you, but in other words, if you're anxious attachment like me, it's anxiety, right? That's really the main thing that kicks in is that nervousness. So that means that you need to be calmed. Now, one of the best ways to calm down is to connect with your body first, and then do something like breathing or movement or self-touch to kind of soothe oneself, right? And get back in your body and say, I'm okay. I'm all right on my own. I can find my legs like that one that we're standing and going back and forth. You got to find your legs so that you have some strength and some self reliance. The thing is that if you practice when you don't need it, when you need it, you'll have a better chance of actually doing the exercises that we've covered or any of the others that we've covered before. So that's what I recommend is a daily practice, as if you were like a monk or anybody who wants to get better at something. And then when it springs up, when you get triggered, you can have a better chance of interrupting the pattern and finding a different pathway. That's the goal. So now, in terms of someone who's avoidant, they tend to shut down. So that's a low energy state, not a high energy state. And in that case, it might be, in addition to trying to find your body again, because you leave your body when you do that, it might be better to do a breath exercise than a calming one. I mean, a breath exercise that's energizing rather than one that is calming because you're already too calm. Or maybe movements. Again, the standing and the pendulation might be good because it's more active and energized than when you are doing something that activates calming states. But it's really up to you, and only you will know what that is. Now, by the way, I have found that most people can be both, but they usually have a dominant. I can do both, but my favorite one is to be nervous and all kind of active and kind of frantic, right? That's my default. But yeah, be aware that this isn't set in stone. You can have a variety. So let's do our first writing exercise. So first of all, write your dominant attachment style, right? Okay. So the first thing I want you to write about is reflect on your relationship with your caregivers during your early years. Were they consistent and nurturing or inconsistent, neglectful, or did they scare you? Just kind of write a few sentences or whatever you need about that first. Okay, so now the next thing is, how do you typically respond in close relationships at the moment? Like, let's go with the present. Do you seek closeness but fear rejection? That would be an anxious attachment. Or do you avoid intimacy and prefer independence, that you're avoiding more often than not? And the other one is, do you feel confused, conflicted, and fearful of both closeness and distance at the same time? That's disorganized. So this is, just going to reinforce what attachment style you really are as a dominant. And I'm going to share something that may help with your process here. Here's the chart. If you are insecure attachment, it's most likely that you're in fight flight most of the time. So what I want you to do is read the feeling, the thought list, and see if you actually agree with that. Like, in other words, are you angry and frustrated a lot? Or anxiety and panic? Or there's probably both if you're insecure attachment. But look at the descriptors of behavior because it'll tell you how your body will tend to be, and see if that matches what you think is true for you. if you're not insecure, but you're avoidant, you're going to be more likely in freeze or shutdown. Overwhelmed, pain, I can't escape, I'm cornered. Of course, I'm cornered, right? Because that's exactly how the avoidant feels, or any of these others. So take a look and just kind of see if that resonates, what you experience. And if so, make notes. Like for me, I don't have resentment on this list, but anger and resentment are one of the things that I feel the most in response to my perceived unavailability of someone helping me out with my needs. Okay, now the next thing we want to do is explore the impact of your attachment style on your life. So the purpose of this is to recognize how your attachment style contributes to stress or limits your life. So the first question is, in what ways does your attachment style add to your stress? You consider patterns in your relationships, and even your emotional regulation, and your life choices as well. So let's start with that. Another thing to add to this is, how does this attachment style interfere with the life you want to create? Like, does it prevent deeper connections? Does it make you avoid opportunities out of fear? Does it lead to patterns in emotional withdrawal or overwhelm? And try to identify specific situations where this is making trouble for you. Now what we want to do is identify the patterns that you want to interrupt. So you've already identified how this pattern of it's an adaptive behavior that was necessary at one point, but now is causing you trouble. So therefore, what you want to do is identify specific triggers that you tend to repeat, or associated with this attachment style that you've just kind of highlighted and identified. Which of these would you most like to change? So let's list those. When I did the session on curative power of truth. So I'm going to just do a summary of that because it ties into this. Here's my experience, and I'm not saying that this is the ultimate thing, because I'm not sure that I'm right about this for everyone, but I want to share it anyway because it's pretty profound. My experience is that these ways in which we avoid ourselves, and I'm not saying we're doing that consciously because it really isn't conscious. So what I mean avoid ourselves is that we abandon our true voice, in a sense. Instead, we want to use these strategies as a way of trying to get our needs met or to protect ourselves, rather than being genuine, because we couldn't be genuine when we were young, right? So you have to think about this. If you're a child at the mercy of your parents or whoever, you don't have a voice, not especially if they're abusive, right? If they're not abusive, you do. And so you had to bury, or not even just, you lost touch with what your authentic desires were, or your authentic sort of expression is, because you had to survive. Part of what these attachment styles represent was a strategy to survive, that the cost of it was to, you had to pay with your authentic voice. You had to suppress it and put it away. My experience is that when we find ourselves being caught up in these patterns, what's missing is an authentic expression. It's a substitute for the authentic expression. It usually has more to do with us abandoning ourselves than anyone else doing anything to us once we're an adult. And we tend to project that out onto the world. So let me give you some concrete examples, because I don't want to be too abstract here. And I'll just talk about my personal experience. My personal experience is that when my behavior in this realm of the insecure attachment flares up, it's because I'm not moving towards that which would be best for me from my own initiative. And so I'm looking for a replacement for that in someone else. That's the neediness. Now, this isn't totally true. I'm not saying it's 100% true, but I do think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that we take on the role of our neglector or abuser in our nervous system after they're gone. The person that abuses us most in our adult life is typically us, to ourselves. Now, that's not always true. If you're if someone's in a bad situation, I recommend that you face that as best you can. But typically what I find is that we take on the role of the abuser and neglector. And part of it's in the form of these attachment styles, instead of moving towards that which we truly want in our heart, right? So that, it's kind of like you're being called forth to be the best person you can be in your life, to share your gifts with the world, which is very overwhelming, by the way. And so it's easier to fall into a pattern of focusing on someone else as the cause of your lack of movement forward, rather than the fact that you're afraid to be genuine, to go into those genuine places. Because the thing that's difficult is that when you do that, you have to encounter the feelings that you felt when you were young. So, in other words, to get to your best self, you have to actually go into the underworld, I like to call it, and be with those experiences because they're in the way, right? These experiences that are unresolved, they're in the way of you being your full self. They're like hidden bits of yourself that are buried or fragmented that have to be kind of reintegrated and healed. That's something that we want you to keep in mind. So, in other words, and let me give you an example. If I find myself feeling angry and resentful towards someone because I don't feel I'm getting my needs met, usually what that means is that I am not aligned properly with my own life. It's not really the other person. It doesn't mean there's nothing I need to talk to them about or work out. But if I'm obsessing, this is this is the insecure attachment person. I don't know if this is true about the avoidance. But when I obsess about someone's not doing what they should do for me, that's a red flag that I'm actually not in alignment with my best self, and I'm not actually advocating for myself. So what that means is that I am not fully grown up in that dynamic. I need to grow up and to be more self-reliant. And the resentment and the anger is a sign that I'm actually not doing that. What I want you to do is to see if you can connect with that in any way in yourself. Like, in other words, okay, I said to take a look at the emotions on the chart that you might relate to you. And when you feel those, see if you can connect with the fact that it has more to do with how you're not treating yourself properly than the other person. And part of that could be initiating a circumstance where you would actually address the problems in the relationship forthrightly instead of going to a pattern of resentment or anger or shutdown and avoidance, which of course doesn't help. Again, it may be more to do with you not attending to yourself and blaming someone else or the outside world instead. In other words, to just repeat, kind of summarize, it's my experience. Those negative emotions often are a red flag for you not being willing to face that which you need to grow up in yourself. Let me put it that way. Or sometimes it means you have to stand up and speak up, but properly, right? Not in that reactive way in which, like, the avoidant is going to be critical of their partner rather than of themselves because they say, you're not doing what you should do for me to feel okay. The avoidant wants to go away and shut the door and not let anyone in and then say it's the other person's fault that they're not available. It's like, yeah, none of those are true, ultimately. All right, so now I'm going to try to tie this all together as best I can. What we're trying to do here is identify patterns that are not optimal and then have strategy of how to shift them over time. It's not an easy thing to do, by the way. I'm not going to oversell this. This is not easy, but I think it's very worth the effort. So what we have here is we have body awareness, and let me share this chart again to explain this. Here's what we're looking at for body awareness. So body awareness tells us where we are in one of these states, right? And then because it says right here on the chart, we need to say, is this the response I have helpful in my thriving and the thriving of those around me in this situation? And if the answer is no, which is what we've just been exploring, then you want to figure out a way to bring yourself from being stuck on the right side of the chart to going to the safety side more often. And what I'm trying to explain is these certain layers of understanding that help that process. You could say someone might have this pattern. When someone forgets something I ask you to remember about around the house and they keep doing something I don't like, am I going into a state of survival? Because that's actually not appropriate. It doesn't warrant that response. It's not helpful. That doesn't mean you can't be irritated at all, but what it means is that if you go into fight, flight, freeze, or shutdown, and in response to someone forgetting what you preferred, that's not really very helpful to your life, is it? The question is, what would it take to change that automatic response? Because it's automatic. It's in the wiring of your body. It's not conscious. So you can't just force yourself not to do it. It doesn't usually work like that. You have to figure out a way to rewire that response. And that's what the practices are for. So what you want is practices that, first of all, when you practice them on your own without any sort of challenge in front of you, you want practices that make you feel more settled in these areas, right? So, for example, if you look at thoughts and feelings, If you do practices and you feel friendly, open, and trusting, that would mean they're working, right? That's how you know whether that's working, is it brings you more into this more often. Now, if you practice that, and that could be meditation, breath work, the somatic exercises, but they have to be practiced daily for you to know whether they're doing this for you. And you want to do them at a time where you're not challenged by something. So that rhythm of daily practice, it actually makes it easier for your nervous system to go from states of danger and life threat over to this area here and stay there more often. When you are triggered, if you practice faithfully, you'll have a better chance of actually using that practice to interrupt that response, right? So this is what we're trying to do, is we want to interrupt the response enough that it fragments it and it doesn't become the default anymore. It still may get you when you're in times of extreme stress, but it won't be a dominant response anymore. It will be less often. So you have daily practice. I don't think there's any way to get around that. Also, awareness of your patterns is essential. And then that's why I think awareness of body sensations is essential. Okay. Then the other thing is that you can't assume that the practice that you have chosen is perfect. It may not be. So the first step is practicing it all. That's actually the first step to being able to change any of this, is to establish a practice that you are faithful towards. That's the first step. Even if it doesn't drastically change anything quite yet. What it does is it proves to yourself that even your subconscious, that you're serious about changing something. Then, through time, after you stick that practice down, by the way, this could be just working out in the morning. That actually counts. That's a practice. Then you start rotating practices through that sort of committed space until you see a shift in the pattern that you want to change. So it does take a lot of commitment. It absolutely does, but it's a lot of awareness. But this is what I find is sustainably going to change something that is, intractable in your life. That's kind of has you stuck in certain ways. Is it has to have what I call a countercurrent. The countercurrent, when it starts, isn't very strong because there's not a lot of momentum. But as time goes by and there's more of that, it's like a current of water that pushes the other way, right? And at first it doesn't do a whole lot because it's kind of weak. And eventually it starts to make a difference that you notice, hey, that last time that I usually get triggered, I was only triggered for an hour instead of 2 weeks. Or I was only triggered for 10 minutes instead of an hour. Or I was able to respond differently, although I still felt mad. I didn't yell. These are the things, depends on your style, right? Maybe someone who's avoidant, they're going to shut down and be numb and not be aware of their feelings. And, that may go on for who knows how long. But in that case, the person would only shut down for a little while and would be able to express themselves instead of be clammed up. This is really up to you. I mean, it's like you're the one that's identifying what you want to change. And even the other part, again, back to the truth thing, one of the best ways to identify what you need to work on is what bugs you all the time, what haunts you about your life, even about what's not right about your life. That is your subconscious part of yourself that's calling you to adventure and to expand. And sometimes it'll be projected onto other people. This is the tricky part. But if you sit with yourself and you're honest, like, what do I really want that I don't have? You'll get an answer, right? You'll get an answer if you sit long enough with yourself, if you sit often enough and you ask yourself honestly, what's it about my life that isn't okay with me, that is really bugs me and that frustrates me and that is kind of intractably true all the time? You'll usually get a very clear answer, and often it's an answer you don't want to hear because it's going to be something challenging that you don't want to face or that you don't think you can have. That's another thing. That honesty about what's calling to you, if you could connect with it, is what will give you the oomph to actually face things that are in the way of having it. And I don't know what that is for anybody. You can only hear it from yourself. If you sit though, you will hear it. It's like, what are you being called to? What is it that you're ignoring because you think, I'll never be able to do that, or it's not available to me, or I'm too stupid, or who knows. And that's resistance trying to keep you from risking. And you want to let yourself risk. You want to have that adventure of your life that you're called to, that adventure that will make your life worth all the trouble that you have in your life. And it will be worth the trouble of facing patterns that are hard to face. And that may be hard to find, but it's there, with enough honesty with yourself. In other words, what do I want to do before I die? That's a good way to put it. Because there is a time limit, there's an expiration date, right? What would I regret if I never got to? That'd be another question to ask yourself. But mostly it's, your conscience is what tells you what you're not doing that you should be doing better than anyone else ever could. Again, you might just get an essence of it. It's not necessarily going to be a definitive sort of technicolor description. It's going to be a sense that I feel like I should work out more, or I've always wanted to be an artist that I never was willing to take the risk. I don't know. I mean, whatever it is. Or, I want my relationship to be more intimate. And I've noticed that it's drifted in a way I don't like. Whatever it is, the calling, that truth that calls to you will tell you what you're not going towards. And like I said, it's my experience is that it's that honest connection with that thing that you truly want that gives you enough oomph to face these things that are hard to face. I don't think you can do it without it. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's my opinion, because it's just way too much discomfort involved in this process unless you have a higher goal to shoot for. And when you have that higher goal and it's really connected to what you really want, it's worth the effort to remove the barriers that are hard to remove, because that at least you have something better that you're reaching for. If you found this content helpful, please like and subscribe. You can look forward to more videos about how to overcome chronic illness and chronic pain.